I came to public health, environmental epidemiology through the influence of my father, who had a evidence-based aspiration for architecture that would be aimed at the flourishing of the client, the use of natural elements, and then a strong commitment to economical approaches. And he wrote lots of books about that, and felt that social justice required that this be delivered in a way that was economical. He came to America enthusiastic about Ford, who was able to take a luxury item and make it available to everybody. Housing for people like this that had been neglected, hospitals, clinics, libraries, schools. And in 1926, he wrote this book, About America, about the industrial way of American building, that you could assemble architecture out of pre-existing, prefabricated items. And he admired the circus tent in this book as the light and portable prefabricated construction. But he was deeply influenced by the prairie-style phase of Frank Lloyd Wright, while wanting to avoid the opulence and massiveness of it. And so when he built the Lovell Health House and School, assembled in 48 hours from these prefabricated steel members, Frank Lloyd Wright called it cheap and thin. And I've written a book now about the relationship between Frank Lloyd Wright and my dad that you can get at Amazon. And Wright was on to something. He did want to make it cheap, and he did want to make it thin, but not in the pejorative way. So in the 30s, he started going back to his early interest in Wilhelm Wundt and physiological psychology, and thinking, how could insights like this help us survive through design? It was the reading of that book in high school that got me into medicine. An example of a kind of thing that concerned him was the glare condition that he wanted to avoid by bringing the windows up to the ceiling level. And this really was first done in that 1929 Lovell Health House, where a lot of attention to the light conditions inside. And these were also of concern in this prefabricated metal ring plan school with bilateral illumination. He finally was able to build this in 1935. And he was happy in Survival Through Design to realize that people had researched and showed that there was a physiological effect from glare. So what were the dimensions that you would be of flourishing that you would try to evaluate and inform? Doing, socializing, unnoticed impacts, and delighting and inspiring. So here's a doing thing. The evangelical minister Robert Schuller had a drive-in church that my father designed for him, and he wanted to step out and address the 1,000 cars that were out there, and then step in and talk to the people inside. And so this large sliding glass window and pulpit to the outside were designed. Socializing in the Neutra VDL studio in residences, there's a padded bar that encourages you to sit down on the floor and chat. I spent my career looking at factors that nobody noticed, like lead paint, which affects ADD, IQ, and a number of other endpoints. Then delighting and noticing, looking upwards and having experiences like this, or the water roof at VDL with the twinkling of the reflections on the ceiling. Nighttime experiences. I'm afraid maybe the spectrum was not properly done at that point, but a lot of attention of what you were seeing out of the windows at night. a light, I don't know if you can see in the left-hand corner, there's a little window at foot level that spills light onto the floor and then onto the ceiling very high and looking out at the San Gabriel Mountains at that church, or this exploratory feeling at the Visitors Center at the Painted Desert. So what I want to talk about today is the institutional arrangements which would allow systematic research in design. And I'm going to talk about two case studies, one where the client is committed to this, Kaiser Permanente, and the other where a design firm is committed to it. Kaiser has a legal commitment to the larger community around its hospitals, even those who are not formal beneficiaries. And so they use sociological and epidemiological quantitative methods to evaluate the programs that they have. And they have a full-time team of scientists that they've budgeted for who do that work. And on their website you can see this. One of the parameters is reach. What proportion of people are reached? So we public health people, we want to vaccinate everybody. We want to have chlorinated water for everybody. And this is an issue, I think, for application of neuroscience or environmental psychology to design. It's not enough that these wonderful buildings of Merdad should do that. There's no way in hell that all of our buildings are ever going to be that beautiful. It just won't happen. So the activities of the Department of General Services or the military, where standards take the average environment and make it improved, is also important. If you think of the normal distribution, we're not only concerned with the 99th percentile, we're also interested in shifting the whole distribution in the better direction so that everybody can benefit from this. They also talk about the strength of the environment and say the dose is a product of the reach and the strength. So here's a low reach, high strength kind of program that they initiated. And here's a high reach, low strength intervention where they have walking paths on their campuses which the neighborhood uses. Another approach that they do is post-occupancy evaluation at Kaiser facilities. Kaiser employed architects and place planners. The ones who were assigned to be the client's representative with the contract architect form hypotheses during the design, and this job is built into their job description. And then they have tended to discard complex statistical evaluation. The people who were involved in the design hang around and look and see how it is used at 6 months and a year. And they also have mock-ups where they test the things in Fremont. So there's a life cycle of design ideas. Client or contract designer has a new idea, neuroscience. This is where neuroscience might get in there. If affordable, it's tried out and they try to predict what the result will be, and then 6 months later they evaluate. If it's successful, now here's the key, it is added to a standard template or specification for the next job, for the next contract architect. Some examples of success: light switches on each side of the bed for right-handers and left-handers, community's use of the walking trail, socializing, smaller waiting area but bigger patient room, experience and unnoticed impact. Well, we heard about the famous experiment of Ulrich about when epidemiologists reveal that there's a shorter stay if you can look out at the greenery. But then people notice that and say that it's more pleasant. A designer-sponsored evaluation, Gensler. The leadership have been champions for evidence-based design, and they have a team there. I think there's about 15 people on it now. It has its own budget line. Some of their evaluations are quantitative, some are ethnographic. And the three main functions are to develop tools for post-occupancy evaluation for the various building types that they deal with, develop and deploy methods for acquiring information to form program, oversee annual designer-led set of research projects. So post-occupancy evaluation, they focus on the hypotheses generated, the design team involved it does it, and it's part of their job description, and then they use appropriate tools. And then they have an annually sponsored research program with 15% of their profits are dedicated to this. They have an annual call for designer-led research, so it's the designers that are doing this. The management approves the candidates, and it may be done in cooperation with academics or research consultants. The Research Institute, that 15-person team, is part of each of these. Someone from that team is on the project, and they make the results available to the world on their website. More of the results than the methodology, I should say. And maybe I'll go back to that ultimately, as these things are used as trade secrets for the benefit of the designers or for the benefit of the organization that is trying to brand itself, we need to address that issue so that the wisdom that is gained is spread more widely. Obstacles to the spread of evidence-based design, one of them is to try, how can this be done with smaller firms? How can one demonstrate that it's cost effective? And there's no Pritzker Prize, I don't think, for this kind of thing. We need, I think, to find out a way to influence the people that actually do building and hire designers to change their way of thinking about this thing and see that it is beneficial for them to do evidence-based design. And disseminating good practices. So this is what we've covered, and if there's time for questions, I'm happy to do it.
Okay, from the audience, questions?
So I like your suggestion that we should share. Right? Part of the problem in sharing is that a lot of the technology is being sold by companies who make it proprietary. And so it's very difficult to actually compare results and to modify things to do experiments in a somewhat different way. So do you think that people like Gensler should try to influence the system a little so that we share not just the results, but how those results were obtained, and for other people to obtain similar kinds of results in other ways?
Yeah, coming from academic research, of course, that's just the cultural norm, right? And increasingly, we're seeing, even in academic research, right, things are being commodified and so forth. So it's a problem. Maybe there has to be a time lag, or I don't know. That would be something to discuss. And by the way, I think this would be something that would be interesting for some of the academic centers to do a survey of practicing architects and some large developers to see how widespread is some kind of evidence-based design, how is it done, how is it budgeted, what are the pros and cons of that.
One more? Okay.
So in regards to sharing, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on kind of three things. Does it matter where you publish, whether it be on a website like Gensler does or actually in an academic setting? or both. Requisite ethics approvals. I know some firms just go directly with the client when they do research, so they can't necessarily then publish in academic settings, as well as the citation culture. We don't necessarily have that in the architecture world, so there's a lot of fear of sharing because they might try to pull something off as their own, whereas in academia, I think there is a strong culture of citing, so how can we get that to infiltrate the architecture world?
Yeah, the nice thing about citing things is that it gets saved so that years after you can go back and find, oh my gosh, Mendel already had figured some of this stuff out about genetics, right? He was kind of forgotten for 30 or 40 years. So I would say both. And having blogs and things on the internet, videos with interviews of happy clients, and there's another academic thing of studying the dissemination of technical advances. That's a whole field in figuring out how to tweak this and spread ideas. As we're going along, we're going to keep getting better and better, but we might as well spread what we found so far.
Up here. Thank you very much for your presentation. I appreciated many aspects of it, including the link to your father's publications and the kind of implications they have, or his thinking had, for what we're trying to do now. It's really great. I wanted to just respond to some of the last points you made about sharing and Gensler. I just before I left, I didn't even have time to look at it. I got a publication from Gensler that I think comes out quarterly. I think it's called Discover, where they summarize some of the key findings from some of their main research projects, usually around a theme. So they do disseminate actively the findings that they come up with in their research. How to get smaller firms to do this or enable them to do it? I wonder, think of all the architects who are here or serve on the ANFA board even, who don't necessarily represent large firms like the ones, and we've also seen quite a number of logos, generally starting with an H for architecture firms on some of the presentations. So I think there is quite an active engagement of firms in research. And just the other thing I wanted to mention was for Gensler, and I'm not saying it's the primary motivation, but it's also a really, I think, substantial marketing tool for them to be able to go into an interview or make a proposal and say, you know, we're not just throwing stuff out here that we made up. We're actually basing what we're doing on evidence, and it's going to help you, and so don't you want to work with us? And I think that's a completely legitimate thing to do. But it's a benefit that wasn't mentioned in your talk, and I think it's worth thinking about. Yeah,
I certainly wasn't meaning this as a criticism of Gensler. I think it's exemplary what they're doing. And so my father talked a good game about this, but he never really did much in the way of systematic posts other than showing up around dinner time to a client or unexpected at all hours. But he could have, and any of you could go to your local architecture school or even sociology school and say, I need someone to come and evaluate my stuff. And there would be students that would be happy to do it for you, I'm sure.
Thank you.